Perfect. So we just like to start this with a land acknowledgement, and I'm in Niagara, so I'm doing a land acknowledgement for our area. We begin our meeting by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, and I apologize for mispronunciations, who have lived and tended these lands for millennia, many of who continue to live and work here today. Our territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, and it was within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. By acknowledging and reflecting on the heritage of this land we share, it reminds us of our responsibilities to fulfill the calls of action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that we are responsible and accountable for making changes to support equity for the health, life, and prosperity of Indigenous peoples across these territories. I'd like to thank everyone for attending our virtual presentation today. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. It's Dr. Carissa Doherty, who will be presenting on why Lyme patients use naturopathic medicine. Dr. Doherty has been a naturopathic doctor for 20 years and completed her pre-medical studies at the University of Guelph, obtaining a specialized honors degree in biomedical toxicology. In 2016, Dr. Doherty completed the ILADS training and spent the year studying Lyme and co-infections. She was invited to speak at Lyme Out Loud with Dr. Horwitz, Dr. Christina Primone, and Dr. Garth Ulrich. Then she hosted a Lyme conference in 2019 with Dr. Armin Schwarzbach and Dr. Kalpala Patel in 2020. Again, I apologize for mispronouncing names. From 2019 to 2023, Dr. Carissa Doherty with her sister, Dr. Sonia Doherty, have been done training conferences internationally as far away as Beijing, China. So we'll have Dr. Doherty do her presentation, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience at the end. You can ask your questions by putting it into the chat box, or at the end, raising your hand, and we'll call upon you to cite your question. So now, please help me welcome Dr. Doherty to the podium. Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Veronica. Thanks for the Canadian Lyme Disease Research Network. And I will start my presentation. Oh, 1 second. Sorry. Thought I had it. All right. All right. So I'm just going to kind of give you a rough idea of sort of what my day is like. Usually my service to Lyme patients would just be to help them. What I'll do is I'll give you a couple of mechanisms on kind of what I do on a daily basis when I do see Lyme patients, so you can get an idea of what naturopaths, how we're of service. I mean, typically we have patients already who present with Lyme, so our job is to make sure that they are properly identified. So these are just Lyme symptoms, which I won't go over because I'm sure a lot of attendees are unfortunately aware of the Lyme symptoms. Sometimes we do verbal or we do questionnaires to sort of pick up if we're to test for Lyme. So we usually use the Horwitz questionnaire. A lot of my job is actually to look at old records and to assess the medical intake. The following slides are actually have patients I've had who have been told they do not have Lyme. So this is a Canadian, this is a public health test that the patient was said they do not have Lyme, although you can see it's quite reactive. This patient was also told they don't have Lyme, even though the public health testing showed that there were potentially co-infections. And then this test was an old test that kind of came across my desk where a complex patient sort of was told by another health practitioner they definitely didn't have Lyme. So sometimes a lot of my work is just going over lab results and making sure that the proper assessment's done. So I won't go a lot about the testing, but I do like using testing to confirm a diagnosis, and oftentimes naturopathic doctors will be used for that process, and that's part of the job. That's okay. Sometimes people will just people or patients will call just for the process of testing, and that's something that we're fine with. A lot of people will use naturopathic doctors for Herxheimer reactions. I will kind of go through a little bit of the biochemistry because I like it. It's fascinating. But a lot of the actual Herxheimer reactions for some people can be mitigated by certain pathways. We do find that patients who are on herbals, botanical medicine, herbal medicine is fascinating, but it's also very complex. It's maybe not as strong in the killing capacity, but what it does offer is a lot of inflammatory pathways that can sometimes mitigate Herxheimer reactions, so that patients can go through treatment and feel better when they're doing it, so the Herxheimer reaction doesn't overtake the sensations. I mean, it was first diagnosed with these two doctors, Jasvik and Herxheimer, when they were treating syphilis. So there are very specific reactions that happen. And again, sometimes that is my job to sort of deal with patients going through very standard regular treatment, but having them be tolerated a little bit more aggressively. Um, so this is a little pathway planner that's on my wall. This is called methylation medicine. The big red X's are a lot of what we do when we see patients have actual adverse reactions to things. So if they're on antibiotic therapy, but they're not managing well, this is, I mean, I like biochemistry. It's a lot. I'm not expecting everyone to kind of look detailed into what's going on. But what happens at the end of the day is these kind of upper circles in the top right hand, these two interwoven circles almost act like gears, and they happen in every single person out there. This happens inside cells. So this is called the methylation pathway that cranks. And then if you look at the sort of bottom middle, there's this piece right here called the Krebs cycle. That's energy and ATP. So what happens in most folks is their upper gears crank and energy is produced smoothly without drama. These X's indicate drama or inflammation or potentially mechanisms of Herxheimer reactions, and they interfere with the Krebs cycle or production of energy or ATP. Now, Lyme infection or Lyme cofactors or complex things can get in the way of these pathways, but a lot of time as my job, I'm looking at where are you getting jammed at the level of the cells, and how can I be of service to sort of unjam that pathway. A lot of this research comes from the genetics. So our complete genome was coded in 2013, and it gave us an ability to learn more about our genetics in the body. So we can't change our genetics, that's how we're hardwired, but what you can do is optimize. So with DNA methylation, that's a changing system on an ongoing basis. That's what you can optimize. Methylation changes if there's damage to the tissue or infection or toxicity. Your methylation, what your genes can do or recover and repair, can change. So a SNP or a single nucleotide polymorphisms is one of these ideas where everyone is born with a certain set of circumstances. And what we try to explain SNPs as sort of like bridges. So some people are born with a covered bridge, a one laneway, it's not that robust. And some people are born with four lane highway bridges. They're very robust. If you're born with a SNP that is not as robust, what we can do as naturopaths is make that traffic be managed more smoothly. So your genetics or your SNPs will impact lots of different things: hair color, eye color, your reactions to drugs, your reactions to environmental factors. You cannot change them. What you can do is optimize on them. So that's kind of that big diagram that I was talking about, is we're trying to optimize on your genetics. This is the full extent of the methylation pathway, so it's a bit intense. And it's a little too overwhelming, but we know that there's a story that continues to unfold in a very systemic way with Lyme infection or co-infections. So because the methylation pathway, when it's pumping and supporting the body, will impact 200 to 400 different pathways downstream. For example, energy and ATP, serotonin, it makes us happy, neurotransmitters, cell membranes, hormone regulation, thyroid function. It can be optimized. So you can't change your DNA, but you can change your nutritional workarounds. You can make that bridge more robust. So the key SNPs in Lyme are listed here, and we're not going to go over them all. But when we look at the actual SNPs or the genetics or the single nucleotide polymorphisms, some SNPs have a trick. And so if we can look at your genes or look at what's actually happening in real-time information, some people are born with the best set of genes, but they are not well. Their genes aren't working. Some people are born with the worst genes, but they are managing well. They're figuring out how to work around their genetic predispositions. So what we look at is, these are the genes that are more impacted with Lyme. What do they do? What do they not do if they're not working as well? And that's what we like, the biochemistry piece. So like a quick little example would be the GSTP1 gene is involved with glutathione. So if we put a little pin in that word, we'll put it aside. We'll talk about it later. But that's sometimes the job of a naturopath, to see where you're jammed, what you're born with, what are you doing well, what are you not doing well, and then how can we be of service. So Lyme and manganese are interesting because a researcher in 2019 found that although most infections prefer iron for source of energy, I'm a human, I like iron, it gives me energy. Lyme is different, it prefers manganese. So when we see manganese be depleted in the body, in the human system, there's a cost to that. We know that the Lyme, to grow it, the actual infection, is very dependent on manganese, but so are we. And human manganese is involved with things like connective tissue, bones, thyroid function, brain function, nerve conduction. And probably one of the biggest things that we look at for manganese is actually the blockage of a pathway that's called SOD, or superoxide dismutase. That pathway is actually very important in making this substance that can kill. It's like nature's own antibiotic, but it comes inside your cell, inside your system, and can kill from the inside out. So we do want to talk about manganese a little bit for some people, but we don't want to provide a huge source of manganese because we know the Lyme infection prefers it. But we also don't want to live in a deficit. So when we're looking at where would that impact that pathway that I popped up, it's actually going to be this X here on the far right hand side. So that pathway is where we make manganese, or sorry, we make the superoxide dismutase, SOD, would actually convert into hydrogen peroxide, nature's own antibiotic. If we can promote that pathway, we can allow the body to kill. If we give too much, we feed Lyme. If we are deficient, we're jammed. So that's a little bit of the idea of those pathways. This is another picture of this happening inside the cell. The other kind of little trick we sometimes talk about is this little box in the bottom, sort of in the center. That box is where patients may say, I took vitamin B1 and my neuropathy went down. A friend of mine kind of got me into this Lyme world where she had an infection, was treated very well, but she had neuropathy. And she's a very smart person. She figured out that B1 solved her neuropathy. She has this SNP, so she's genetically predisposed to jam in that pathway. B1 was something that allowed her that pathway to work more efficiently. Molybdenum is a trace mineral, and in a similar way, it helps with that pathway that we just showed, the SUOX pathway. Now, glutathione is important in many different things, but the big thing with glutathione that it's an antioxidant, but specifically for Lyme infection, it's the pathway that's needed in the liver for detoxifying bacterial byproducts. So if you're low in glutathione, you can't clear the gross little dead debris. And that may be a modification in how you recover. Glutathione is also needed for proper immune system. So if being sick or having an infection depletes your glutathione levels, you're more at risk for immune system dysregulation. It's also a great cleanup. So we look at the little picture here, the glutathione pathway is down there. If Lyme infection and the kind of mess that it makes blocks you above the pathway, your body won't even make enough glutathione. So if you provide glutathione, for some patients, it's game changing. It gives them energy, it gives them the ability to heal and recover. It pushes them past a plateau that they're stuck in. And it on its own, the glutathione production in the body, if it becomes too low, can trigger autoimmunity. So it puts us at risk. Not only will it trigger kind of the autoimmunity piece, but it can also trigger damage called oxidative stress, and then another specific type of inflammatory pathway called cell danger response. At the end of the day, we don't want to have glutathione for many different reasons, but putting it in or supporting it tends to be very safe. It's water soluble. It tends to be of service to you. If you need it, great. If you don't need it, typically a person will know I tolerate it or I don't tolerate it. It's very safe. The other piece that people use naturopathic doctors for is the POTS. So POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, is one of the reasons why treatments don't work. So proper diagnosis can happen, proper treatments are amazing, and if the person has POTS, then the blood flow is impacted and the treatments don't actually get to the location that's needed. And POTS is a tricky condition for sure, but most doctors, although Lyme is hard to diagnose, most doctors also won't know about the POTS correlation. So the piece that I really like in office is that we can give patients a very quick little test. We can get them to do at home. What is your heart rate? How many beats per minute? And in the position of seated, lying down, and standing, if there's an elevation where your heart rate goes up 30 to 40 points, you have this condition that may stop your treatment from working. There is a lot of adrenaline or adrenaline floods through the vessels to make sure the blood flows. So a lot of these patients will present with significant anxiety, although it's medically not an anxiety issue. It's a very medical condition. So the quick little kind of home assessment is there. It can change if you're a bit younger, then the heart rate has to go up 40 points for the diagnosis. But this is the quick, fast home system. Now, the condition itself is very common with lightheadedness and dizziness and heart palpitations, but it also can be presenting with digestive issues or pain. And then fatigue and lightheadedness, I think a lot of people do know about POTS, but I think that this little diagram is nice because it gives you a little bit more information about multiple systems that are just the same diagnosis. Now, those that are responding to salt and water are great. Those that require a little bit more intervention, I'll give you a little summary slide of what we found have been some of the tricks that we're finding for POTS. I actually found that my kids had POTS and my niece had POTS. When we found a lot of people who got COVID, got POTS triggered afterwards, it became a lot more famous in the last couple of years, unfortunately. And I think because we had a lot more people becoming significantly impacted by POTS, there's a lot more tricks that we found were of service to people. So this is just a quick little summary slide. Not everyone is going to be of service to these ideas, but when we're looking at, what can we do to leverage, some of these ideas are of service. This is not my child, although this could have easily been my child. But the other reason that naturopathic doctors are used are for biofilm. So biofilm, this is a very visual example of gross, disgusting inflammation in a cute, beautiful face. But the biofilm piece is one of the things that will also stop a protocol from working. All infections can take advantage of biofilm. So biofilm itself is fascinating, unfortunately, but biofilm is a single cell group of organisms that work as a unit. So they're sort of like coral in the ocean. Coral, I'm not a biologist, but coral can clean the ocean. It's amazing, it's fascinating. Biofilm is of service not to the person, but to the microbes. So they form this safe house that actually can keep these microbes very strong. The biofilm presence is very common in humans. So we all have biofilm. It's just what infections decide to take advantage of this safe house. So these biofilms can attach to areas. And this is Garth Ehrlich's kind of first paper on biofilm. I met him, he's very smart. So this is the first time we said, look, we think repetitive ear infections are probably biofilm. This was kind of his first, this is a biofilm piece. He then redid the research a little bit more recently, 2016, to confirm. So biofilms are gross and they are hard. They do allow antibiotic resistance, which means that the treatment protocol can be interrupted. And things inside the biofilm have low penetration for treatment for antibiotics. What happens inside the biofilm is any infection inside will drop their cell wall. They'll exchange DNA and secrets with their friends, and that's where the term resistance and persistence comes. The outer wall is called a polysaccharide wall or slime wall, like the picture shows. And the inner wall is a metal or a mineral wall. So you can have both no oxygen and oxygen inside this crazy biofilm. And both ideas mean that you can have different infections that can survive. The term resistance and persistence came from inside the biofilm idea. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that if you're going to kill an infection, you do biofilm work. Because the infection can also act as a unit and quorum sense, they're very clever, like gang warfare. These are some natural agents that are very helpful for biofilm. We work with Origins Pharmacy, they're a compounding pharmacist, and they make the equivalent of the BEG or the BEG spray. So the BEG spray is very famous in the mold world. As naturopaths, we can't prescribe the B and the G in the formula, so we've sort of made our own with grapefruit seed extract, EDTA, and a couple of other biofilm agents put into the nose spray. There's the outer wall of a biofilm, or the polysaccharide outside slime wall, does really respond well to herbs, which is lovely. In the inner wall, though, you need a chelating substance. So this is not my formula. This is Dr. Paul Anderson. He's a naturopath in the US. He formulated a combination called Biofilm Buster, and he put other compounds in there that, like bismuth, and that had thiol molecules that acted like a big, kind of like a big tool to cut into the inner wall of the biofilm, which is the metal and mineral. So that's called a phase 2 biofilm support. So you open up the one wall, you open up the second wall, and then your killing ability with antibiotics is more effective. And these are just a very visual. We've probably all experienced sinus infections. They're awful, they're sticky, they're gross. That's biofilm. And because they can stick into the tissue and they can go quite deep into the sinus cavity, when you're doing something like biofilm work, you want to make sure you actually touch the surface where the biofilm is located if you have access. The other reason that people use naturopathic doctors is stress. So stress, anxiety, it's a very general term, but it's also a medical term. We look at the adrenal system or the stress system and we measure it. What is your adrenaline doing? What is your cortisol doing? Are you jammed? Are you making too little or too much? And is that blocking your care? Cortisol is measurable, should be high in the morning, gets you out of bed in the morning, and then it allows you to sort of have energy throughout the day. And then cortisol is eliminated when you want to sleep. So you want to have no cortisol when you sleep because it will keep you up. And cortisol is okay. It's normal to have cortisol. That's your energy hormone. What isn't normal is too little or too much. The other neurotransmitters like dopamine and adrenaline and serotonin are also testable when we look at how is the body working with the stress system. This little guy here is another area where you can get jammed. It's called the IDO1 pathway. It is not ideal. So if your body is giving you energy, and instead of giving you nice dopamine and nice serotonin and nice serotonin, the neurotransmitters, it's providing more IDO1 inflammation, that's bad. IDO1 inflammation is very inflammatory. It's very not popular, but there's a lot of research on it triggering very inflammatory pathways called quinolinic acid or chyonic acid. There are supports for this, but it's a very specific inflammatory pathway that we want to make sure that a person is not in because it will also block care. So generally, when we look at the IDO1 pathway, there's a couple tricks for helping it. That's why naturopaths are famous for putting people on restrictive diets. It's not that we enjoy this work. Well, it's that it's a very medical intervention. So people that are in IDO1 inflammation do respond. It pulls them out of the IDO1 inflammation when they have a restrictive diet, grain-free, dairy-free, and the sugar piece. That's why we sound crazy, but that's actually why we do it. There's a naturopath up in Ottawa, and she uses xylitol, and that helps make sure also the biofilm piece is there. So the type of diet we talk about, these are just some examples, but every kind of recommendation we do is usually for a medical reason. We also use herbs. Medication is, the antibiotics are a lot more aggressive, but we do find sometimes people are going on antibiotics and they're not responding, or they can't go on antibiotics because it's too harsh for the system, and then they sort of fall to naturopaths to continue the killing. So we use these type of herbs, but we also have to make sure that it's high enough to do its job. So the dosing has to be appropriate if you want to not go head to head with antibiotics, because that's too hard to do. But if we want to make sure that we are killing, we use the herbs that are well researched, and then we judge them. You know, are they doing their job? When we're looking at time frame, Dr. Eva Sappi is talking about the lifespan of the Borrelia burgdorferi being, depending on how long it's been there, can be up to 6 to 8 months. So we do want to make sure that we're killing for long enough. There are a lot of chronic inflammatory pathways, and I won't go over them. But this is also why we use herbs, because sometimes complex ideas like T1, T2, Th17, those are very complex ideas, but herbs can sometimes calm and soothe and downregulate the inflammatory pathways. The same is true with inflammatory cytokines. They are a big deal. They can stop a great plan from working if the inflammatory cytokines are messed up or in a balance that's pro-inflammatory. So we use herbs to calm down the cytokines or balance the cytokines. So generally, general treatment is looking at things like making sure your digestive system is stable, making sure you're not constipated, making sure your pathways, your SOD pathways are stable, not for very long, supporting with glutathione. Make sure we talk about things that block, that would feed an infection. For example, iron feeds infection. We address things like mast cell reactions, the CBS pathway, those little X's we talked about. We look at biofilm. We make sure POTS is not an issue, and if we can be of service to mitigate it, then we will help. We don't forget about molds, and we try to look at the stress system. We also try to not forget about viruses. So viruses are something that aren't very common, but if there's a chronic viral infection, that also stops the mechanism. There are minor concerns that we see sometimes that also block a plan. Carnitine is an amino acid, like a piece of protein. If carnitine deficiency is happening, which can happen with chronic infection, then we have another type of mechanical bottleneck. So we look at that. And the virus piece is sometimes what we see. So if we see high viral counts that are blocking the infection piece, then that has to be looked at. And we do find a lot of patients come to us and want to know about the mold story. So do I have mold? Do I have Lyme? Have I been exposed? Is that why my Lyme treatments aren't working? So that's a lot of what naturopaths will also manage. I'm not going to go into sort of all the co-infections and all the tests we do, but my job is to make sure that if someone is asking for help, then I listen to them and I make sure that we figure out how to make them feel better as fast as possible. If we're missing something, we try to address it. If there's a mechanism that we're missing and we could test it, then we do so. So some of the functional tests we wind up doing can be a lot. Not everyone gets all these tests, but if there's something we're missing, these are generally some ideas that we would try to pursue. And that is it. Sorry, there's lots of slides. I just wanted to go through as quickly as possible to kind of give you an overview of a little bit about what my day is like.
Thank you, Dr. Doherty. I thought that was excellent. I know it's so complex and so many different bits and pieces. And I think, what my personal experience with NDs, naturopathic doctors, is that they've been able to look at the big picture and all those multiple pieces. So I don't see any questions in the chat room, but I don't know if anyone has any questions. If you want to, use the raise your hand button or put something in the chat if you have a question for Dr. Doherty.
Easy.
Wow. Well, I do see someone. Rob, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Thank you.
Hi, sorry, I'm remote here. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Oh, we have two Robs, but Rob, yep, go ahead, Rob Murray, if you have a question after.
Rob Murray first.
No, you go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw your hand raised. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks for that. This is very far outside of my area of expertise, but I was curious about the SNP slide that you showed, and where those come from, where the SNPs come from.
Like information on the slide itself, or?
Yeah, I've got it. You mentioned a bunch of SNPs, like these are just SNPs in the human genome.
Right.
Key SNPs in those with Lyme. And I was wondering, like, what the research is behind that slide specifically.
There's a naturopath, his name is Bob Miller, and he did that research. He's a big Lyme naturopath in the US, and he actually has a bunch of different research studies. I pulled this one because it summarizes it. What I can do is I can put that information in the chat. Let me just go grab the slide quick.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah. I think he presented at one of the iLabs. He was presented at a couple of them before they kind of went virtual. So that's my cut and paste version of that. The summary. Wait, there it is.
There it is.
So Robert Miller, you can find information on his that information there. Yeah.
Great.
He's done
Thank
a
you.
couple of them. So yeah, they're really interesting.
Rob Murray, did you have a question as well?
I'm just wondering if you find any more acceptance from the medical community and what you're doing, or resistance. I'm a dentist, and I realize so many of the attitudes we pick up are in school from our instructors, that there's only one way to go here, and it's slowly over listening to these medical doctors that actually treat cases that they call integrative medicine, and they find it works better, and the reasons are simple. The medicines are better tolerated. They work better. They can use fewer antibiotics. And when science is finally done on some of these things, as has been done, can't think of his name fast enough, Chinese physician. Ying Zhang. Ying Zhang is done. Then it shows that these things are as effective or more effective than antibiotics. So it starts to make some sense that I realize that I'm been biased from the medical education point that everything has to be check mark, double-blind controlled studies. And of course, there's no money to be made off of natural products. So I want to read up something on monolaurin, I think would be the name, coconut oil. Anyway,
Yeah.
phenomenal properties, antiviral, anti-inflammatory, bacteria, virus can't develop a resistance. Pharmaceutical companies would love to patent it, but they can't. Why would they bother? They can't patent it, can't make any money on it. So just faced with the biases I've had and the change that's happened over the years here.
I think I'm as a naturopath, I don't want the job as a medical doctor. I think I need, we need medical doctors, but I don't want to be you, because the medical doctors have a tough grind, right? Like that little book way up there, I don't know if you can see, it's got like 1,000 chapters in it. That's the framework for every condition in Canada and how it should be treated as a medical doctor. And I like it because I will like look at what a medical doctor will use, but their frameworks are so limiting. And so I feel like, because as a naturopath, I have a lot of safe tools, I have better flexibility, I can do lots of things at the same time. And doctors can't do that. They can't put people on 10 drugs, right? But I can put you on 10 supplements very safely. So I think I'm 20 years out, I'm getting old, but I also appreciate the flexibility I have as a naturopath, and know that because complex conditions require lots of care, I don't think medical doctors have as easy ability to put in 2 drugs for this, 5 drugs for this, 5 drugs for this. It winds up being hard to actually manage. So I find that the conversations I have with medical doctors are great. I think over the years, because I've been in the same place for 20 years, I have colleagues, I have medical doctors that I can pick up the phone with. Some, think we're crazy, or we think we practice in the naked, they're naturalists, but I'm not. But a lot will sort of say, it seems like my patient is having something I don't really understand. Can you put me in the direction? And so I'll just say, this is a resource, go start there, and we can have a conversation back. So I find any conversation I have with the doctor has been lovely. But yeah, I have a lot more flexibility than they do. So I like my job.
That's great. There is one question in the chat, Dr. Doherty, about, can you tell me where I might access the biofilm buster you referred to? Is that prescribed by an ND, or is that something people can get? Because
there are things on the market that are over the counter. A lot of the things that we tend to use as naturopaths are over the counter. Some combinations don't exist over the counter. So Paul Anderson, he's the doctor in the US. I think he does sell now his combination in the US called Biofilm Buster. I did take his name. I copied his formula. It wasn't available in Canada. So I made our compounding. We have a naturopath who makes things for us. Our compounder made it for us.
Okay.
So I think you can actually purchase Biofilm Buster from the US.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And Lisa has her hand up with a question. Lisa, do you want to go ahead?
Hi there. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm really interested. I mean, you said a lot about, the kinds of testing and the kinds of treatment that naturopathic doctors offer. And I'm also aware that, patients come to naturopathic doctors to receive care, beyond just, the testing and, the kinds of treatments. So I'm wondering if you have any reflections on, the kinds of care that naturopathic doctors offer that is maybe distinct or unique beyond sort of the diagnostic testing and beyond sort of the specific treatments that you offer. If you have any reflections on that, on why Lyme patients may be turning to naturopathic doctors.
I think it is because I can do 10 things at the same time. Not that anyone enjoys that pill count or that supplement count or the dietary restrictions that we tend to love people to put people on, but I think that is the ability to attack a complex disease on multiple fronts at the same time. And like the dentist, I can't remember his name, but I think Robert, the dentist was talking about, because it's a complex condition, it sort of has to be addressed on a lot of different fronts. So I am trained like that. I can give you things on multiple fronts, where medical doctors really do sort of have that one idea, and then a separate idea, but it's almost like a different front. So it's like Ruth was talking about, is the whole system. That is how I'm trained. That is kind of what I practice. And for Lyme, not everyone who comes to see me does really well. There are people I have to refer out. You're not responding. But typically when you see a naturopath, we do expect you to respond, have benefits in some of the symptoms within 1 to 3 visits. If we can't figure you out, or the things I have are not of service to you, I also tell you it's not working. Go on to someone who's smarter, more detailed, more aggressive in certain ways, and try it. So our responses are pretty quick. If you feel better with these ideas, you also will feel it fast, because we're talking about the small cells, which is a fast turnaround for benefit. I don't know if I answered it, but I just think that the expectations are clear. Like, if it's going to work, you're going to feel it. And if it's not of service to you, we're going to tell you, we've tried lots of these ideas and they're not working. So now these ideas have been addressed. You got to figure something else out.
Thank you.
Anyone, are there any other further questions before we wrap up for the day? I don't see any more in the chat, but give a minute to see if anyone else has a hand raised or question. No?
Easy.
Right.
I talk fast too.
Yeah.
So thank you for
thank you for all your information. It was great. Veronica, I don't know if you have additional information to wrap up. Yeah,
I have a few things. I first of all want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Carissa Doherty for taking this opportunity to provide a unique perspective and options for Lyme patients in the community, and how naturopathic medicine and modern medicine do work together in times. And so it was great to hear your perspectives on what, Lyme and the use of naturopathic services and what's out there. I do want to take this opportunity to also thank Ruth Peters for helping to moderate. You did a fantastic job. And appreciate your land acknowledgement at the start as well. I do want to let the attendees know that we are continuing our discussions with Lyme disease and tick-borne disease awareness month. We have 2 more presentations this week. Our next presenter is Dr. Eva Sappi, who is presenting on the topic potential connection of Borrelia infection and breast cancer. Her presentation is tomorrow at 12 o'clock Eastern time. So we do hope you can join us then. Also, a reminder, if you have an opportunity, please take part in our challenge, wear green, take a photo and share it with us to help spread awareness of Lyme disease and tick-borne diseases. If you are an artist out there and want to take a picture of your artwork, whether it's a drawing, a pottery, a sketch, a reflection, poetry that expresses what you think Lyme disease, tick-borne disease awareness should all be, and take a photo, and those photos will also be entered. We will be doing our live draw on May 31st at 1 o'clock when we have our last presenter. And there is a chance to win one of 4 $25 Starbucks e-gift cards. And you can send your photos into clydern@gmail.com along with your name and email for the contest. And finally, just a pitch out there that TICNET Canada will be hosting its first in-person scientific symposium this fall in Toronto, Ontario, October 24th and 25th. The planning committee just met today again, and we're hoping to have registration and abstract submission information out by June 1st. So if we get the details out before the month's end, we will be sharing it with you during these presentations. So again, thank you for everybody for attending today. Thank you to Ruth for helping with moderating, and Dr. Doherty for her presentation today. And we hope you join us the rest of the week. Have a great rest of your day and week, and hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Brana.
Thanks.
Bye.